Pope Francis has just come out and condemned the mockery that took place at the Paris Olympics opening ceremony. Stick around to find out more details. Well, we have all been asking the same question. Where is Pope Francis? Why isn't he saying anything about the Paris Olympics opening ceremony? In fact, I did 4 days ago a video called Pope Francis ignores Paris Olympics question mark. And I was considering the question. First of all, should Pope Francis comment on this situation? And I just said, yeah, there's no reason why he shouldn't, but there are many reasons why he should. And then I was considering, why hasn't he said something yet? And really, there was no good justification, be that as it may. He has finally come out and released an official statement condemning the mockery that took place at the opening ceremony. Now, a lot of people gaslighted us. A ton of people gaslighted us. And they said, oh no, this wasn't a mockery of the Last Supper. Yeah, you know what? That's not the case. That's just completely not true. It was a mockery of the Last Supper. Barbara Butch, who participated in the ceremony, was a very central figure there, confirmed it was a mockery of the Last Supper, as well as several other participants. And the man himself, Thomas Jolly, who was part or actually organized the whole ceremony, he came out and said, well, this was a depiction of Bacchus, and that's kind of where I was getting it from. But in reality, we saw that an Olympics spokesman came out just a few days ago and said, actually, Thomas Jolly's intention here was inspired by Da Vinci's Last Supper. So there's just no way to continue denying it. Basically, what happened was they got a lot of pushback. They thought that they would get maybe a lot of support for this inflammatory behavior. They got a lot of pushback, and they didn't realize it would be like this. And so they tried to back out of it and tried to put a spin on it, but it just simply didn't work. And immediately Catholic bishops started coming out and condemning it. Even non-Catholics and non-Christians were condemning it. I've saw Muslims, I've saw all sorts of people condemning this opening ceremony, and rightly so. But we were all asking, well, hey, shouldn't, Pope Francis say something? I mean, I recall whenever Muslims were being mocked for their faith, I remember Pope Francis came out and said, hey, we shouldn't be mocking people for their faith. And I asked the question, well, if Pope Francis can say that in defense of Muslims, how come he can't say that in defense of Christians, his very own? Because I know that he loves Jesus, he loves the Eucharist, and so why isn't he saying something? And by the way, I heard a lot of people say, hey, it's just a painting. Da Vinci's Last Supper is just a painting. What's the big deal? And I always have to respond to such people and say, it's not just a painting. It's what it represents that is really the issue here. It's kind of like for those people, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't appreciate it if somebody defiled an image of their mother, father, daughter, son, best friend, dog, goldfish, whatever. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be happy. And they wouldn't say, oh, it's just a picture at that point. No, because that picture represents something. So this was a big deal. And it was great to see so many Christians and even non-Christians push back on the Olympics. A lot of sponsors pulled out and stopped supporting them. Okay, so I want us to take a look at what Pope Francis has said. It just came out. So this is just breaking news here. Let me share my screen and let's take a look at this, this statement by Pope Francis together. You should be able to see it right around now. Now, on the bulletin here for the Holy See, it's in French right now. The original text was in French, so I had to get handy-dandy Google Translator to kick in here. And effectively, here's what it says whenever you get Google to translate it. Okay. So the Holy See, that's of course, the Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis, the Holy See was saddened by certain scenes at the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympic Games, and cannot but join the voices that have been raised in recent days to deplore the offense done to many Christians and believers of other religions. You know why? Because this is also an offense to Muslims. Though they don't hold to the same view of Jesus as Christians, they still at least believe he's a prophet. So even Muslims were offended. So that's why it says, and other religions. This was an offense to especially Christians, but also people of other religions who venerate Jesus to one degree or another, despite their errors. So notice this, it's very clear. And the Holy See is not jumping on board with those who are gaslighting us, telling us, there's no mockery of Christianity here. You know what? I am so glad they recognize that that isn't the case. They saw through that propaganda and they recognize this for what it was. And that is a shot at Christians, especially a shot at one of the most holy moments in Christianity, the Last Supper, the institution of the Eucharist, where we receive the body, blood, and soul and divinity of Jesus, one of the most precious moments in Christianity. This was mocked with transgenders and drag, imitating a Last Supper. Barbara Butch, who again is central to that ceremony, said it was the gay Last Supper and posted Da Vinci's Last Supper underneath it, clearly showing that was the intention. Okay, so the Vatican saw through this. Pope Francis saw through it, condemned it, says this isn't right. This is a mockery of Christianity. And then it says, in a prestigious event where the whole world comes together under common values, there should be no illusions that ridicule the religious beliefs of so many people. Exactly. Why was this even necessary? Isn't this supposed to be a moment where we can just kind of have a moment of levity and get away from all the politics, get away from all the toxicity out there, and we could just maybe focus on some sports, something that we can have some common ground with without any agenda? Instead, we had a very disgusting agenda shoved down our throats, and in the process, a mockery of 2.4 billion people in the world. Well, Pope Francis says freedom of expression, which is obviously not called into question, finds its limit in respect for others. This is Catholic theology, and a lot of people don't recognize that. Yes, there is freedom of speech, but to a degree. Some people don't know that. In Catholic theology, in the Second Vatican Council, and plenty of documents of the Catholic Church talk about this. To a degree, you have freedom of speech, but it has limits. And this is actually something I'm going to be talking about in the future in a separate episode, because it deserves its own episode where we go into this in detail. And he says, look, it has limits when it comes to mocking other people. There are also other limits involved here as well. So I appreciate that that was noted. Now, we have to ask a few questions here. We have to ask, okay, why did it take Pope Francis so long to respond to this? With some things, Pope Francis is Johnny on the spot. I mean, he's just bam, immediately. Sometimes the same day of a controversy, he can respond. I mean, I'm thinking of that instance where Pope Francis several times used a very offensive word about homosexual people. And even after he was corrected on it, he still used it again. Well, anyways, he used a very offensive word and got him into, some pretty serious trouble with the news. And he responded the same day. But then when it comes to situations like this with the Paris Olympics, well, hey, he said something, and it's a good statement. I appreciate it. But you do have to ask, why did it take so long? And in some ways, I kind of feel like it's a day late, dollar short, but at the same time, it's better than nothing, because if he didn't say anything, that would be way worse than being a day late, dollar short. I'd rather him be a day late, dollar short than not show up at all without any money, right? It's better than nothing. And so I totally give him that. But we have to ask the question, why did it take so long in this particular case? Whereas in other cases, he's Johnny on the spot. And some people said, well, I think he hasn't said anything until now because Pope Francis agrees with what happened. Slander, absolute slander. Of course he doesn't. Of course he doesn't. But you still have to ask, well, why didn't he say anything? I want to point to a couple things for us to consider before I answer the question. I want to show you something that came up 2 days ago in the news. I spoke about this previously. Turkey's Erdogan tells Pope immoral Olympic ceremony mocks sacred values. So we saw the Turkish president was saying in the news he's going to be contacting Pope Francis and asking for him to comment on the situation, which he did 2 days ago. And Pope Francis said, thank you so much for reaching out to me. I really appreciate this feedback that you've given me, because he was concerned. He said, look, this is offensive to Christians and Muslims. It's an offense to humanity. He says it's a disgusting attack on humanity's sacred values, and asked Pope Francis to speak up. Now, I had asked the question originally 4 days ago when Pope Francis hasn't spoken up at the time. I asked the question, what could possibly explain this? And I thought, okay, let me go out on a limb. Maybe he's not yet aware. Because I do know elsewhere Pope Francis says he's not on social media. He's not on the computer. He doesn't even use his own cell phone. Somebody else dials it for him and hands it to him. So he's not directly on social media. But I said, look, several days into this, somebody by now has told him. Someone has told him. He's bound to know. So even 4 days ago, I was saying, look, I don't think it's really conceivable that he hasn't heard about this by now. So for him to not speak about it has to be unrelated to the question of whether or not he's aware. Surely he's aware by now. But you know what? He chose to speak about this after he was contacted by the Turkish minister, the Turkish president. He chose to speak about it. So his failure to speak about it before wasn't because he somehow agreed with it or thought it was right or something, or didn't think it was a big deal. For him to speak about it now after he was directly told about this by the Turkish president makes me wonder, did he have some people around him who are sabotaging him, who are not getting this information to him, who will get him some information like, well, hey, the homosexual community is offended. You need to say something. And they'll be Johnny on the spot and getting that message to them that day. But when it comes to some other things, they're maybe a little slower in getting some stuff to them. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. But I do think it's interesting that he spoke up about it only after he was contacted and we could verify that he was contacted. Does he have people close to him, close advisors, who are sabotaging him and keeping information from him? If he does, he's partly responsible for that, because that means he's chosen really bad advisors. The one reason why I'm really starting to suspect that may be the case? I noticed something. I want to show you something from Libero Milone here in just a moment, who has also expressed concerns that the people close to Pope Francis are impeding his access to the Pope. I want to take a look at it. Although I do have to first show this to you. Some people have opined that, well, maybe it was Fernandez who really encouraged him to say something. I just want to throw that out for good measure, because we do see 2 days ago, Pope Francis did meet in an audience with Cardinal Fernandez, the head of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. What was this audience about? I don't know, because it doesn't tell us. Could it be Fernandez, because he's more in touch with what's going on media and in the news? Could it be Fernandez said, Holy Father, you need to speak about this issue. You can't be silent here. Could it be? Maybe. Or could it be that it was the Turkish president who made him aware, and as a result, he has spoken up about it? I don't know. But here's something very disturbing. I want to show you a clip of Libero Milone. Now, who is Libero Milone? This was a guy who was auditing Vatican finances. Pope Francis has been adamant about rooting out corruption in the Vatican. And in 2014, put Cardinal Pell in office to start doing some investigation into different dicasteries, into different cardinals. Now, in a video yesterday, I showed that breaking news that it turns out Cardinal Mueller ended up having money that didn't belong to him, that belonged to the dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith, about 200,000 euros. It's alleged that he had that money in his personal account, and there were all kinds of other wild things going on with money in that dicastery, as well as some others. These are allegations. I showed yesterday he did not sufficiently respond to the allegations yet, which is even more disturbing. And if he doesn't sufficiently respond to them, you already know what it is at that point. But be that as it may, I went into detail about that yesterday, and I tied it to, as a few others have as well, like the Pillar, Libero Milone, who was telling us a few years ago he did, as part of this investigation, he was auditing different departments in the Vatican and ended up uncovering that there were cardinals who were pocketing money. And he described a situation that to the T is the situation that Cardinal Mueller is accused of. So it seems like what he was telling us a few years ago when he came out and said, I uncovered some massive problems with cardinals pocketing money, and he described a particular situation at the time 2 years ago. We didn't know who it was. Well, to the T, it describes what we now know to be accusations made against Cardinal Mueller. Maybe Cardinal Mueller will give us further explanation and show us how this is all one big misunderstanding. But I'll point out, as I did in my video yesterday, he has not done that so far, and it doesn't look good for him. And what he did respond to were some petty accusations, and he left on the table the big ones, such as Pope Francis told him that 200,000 euros that was found in his private account that shouldn't be there, pay it back. Didn't address that claim. Didn't address that allegation. Conspicuous. Well, I pulled up a video from Libero Milone, and I'll probably go over this in more detail. This was posted a month ago in an interview on EWTN. And he speaks out because he was fired. He was previously reporting directly to the Pope about financial corruption in the Vatican. He was telling them, he was telling Pope Francis directly what was going on. And he was having all these meetings with the Pope, and all of a sudden they stopped. And before, Pope Francis was responding to all of his written correspondence, and all of a sudden it stopped. And Pope Francis just no longer responded to him. So he would write to him, he would try to meet with him, and it's radio silence. And he says, hey, I was, fired from my job for pointing out some corruption here. He doesn't think it was Pope Francis who had anything to do with it, but he accuses some high up cardinals as responsible for that because he was cleaning house and exposing fraud and massive issues. And one of the people that he accuses, turns out the Vatican has also so far convicted him of certain behavior. I'm talking about Cardinal Becciu. In fact, I did a whole video on it. So some of Milone's story is being corroborated. Well, long story short, I want to show you a clip here because he notes himself. He believes the reason why Francis isn't responding to him is not because he's unwilling. Pope Francis was all on board in getting rid of corruption. He's really beginning to suspect that there are some people around Pope Francis that are not giving him access. that are not getting his letters to him. Is that possible? I don't know. Let's watch it together real quick.
Putting money in their own pockets.
Yes.
But that is the same thing, isn't it? Financial mismanagement and corruption at the highest levels. If cardinals are taking money and putting it in their pockets.
Corruption can mean other things as well. What I meant was, they, instead of using money they were receiving for the benefit of the cash street they were using, this money ended up in their own pockets. It doesn't mean that they were actually corrupting others.
But they were defrauding the department to which the money was meant to go to. Princes of the church, next in line to become pope, are lining their own pockets.
Yes, but it happened.
Okay, now, again, Cardinal Mueller is accused of being one of those people. And the evidence against him is very strong. Now, watch what he says later on in this video. Same video, just skipping a little bit to the 25-minute mark. He's asked point blank, Milone, why do you think that Francis isn't responding to you anymore? What do you think is going on? Watch.
Cardinal Parolin called me to ask me why I had resigned. Now, he was the boss of Cardinal Monsignor Archbishop Becciu. So it was obvious that Cardinal Parolin had not been informed.
And you didn't hear from the Pope after that?
No, but Cardinal Pell spoke to the Pope, and I got the impression from Cardinal Pell that even the Pope was surprised. But I've never spoken to him. I've sent 7 letters to the Pope, hoping to meet with him, to explain. Yeah, but he's met people in the prisons, he's met all sorts of people in the world, but he hasn't met me.
Why do you think that is?
I think that they impeded him.
Did you feel vindicated in a way?
You hear that? I think they impeded him. This guy is not saying Pope Francis is part of the corruption. In fact, he's on Team Francis and saying Pope Francis is trying to get rid of the corruption. But he is saying there are people close to Pope Francis who are impeding him from getting access to certain people and getting certain information. I'm starting to really wonder if that's true. Because I have to ask the question. Now we know Pope Francis is against what took place, although it was pretty obvious he would clearly be against that kind of mockery. We already knew that. But if there was any doubt, now you know Pope Francis clearly is against the mockery that took place at the Olympics opening ceremony. So I had to ask the question, well, why hasn't he said something until now? Could it really be that he just isn't aware? Like, how could that even happen? Again, he's not on social media, but still, you got people around you who are advising you, and sometimes you can speak on issues the same day. So I then find out, okay, well, now we have proof that he's made aware because the Turkish president just spoke to him. And he just had a meeting with Fernandez, and I know Fernandez is aware and he's going to tell him something. I'm sure of it. So at that point, I was just waiting. Okay, Pope Francis, he's got to say something now because now he's clearly aware. And now he comes out and says something. But he didn't say something before until we knew that he was made aware. What does that tell you? That tells you it could be, and it seems to now be a little bit more plausible than I perhaps considered before, that he does have some people around him who are trying to keep him away from certain information and are sabotaging him. And he is partly responsible for that because he has chosen really bad advisors, if that's true. Now, if that's not true, then okay, what does explain? He condemns it, but took forever to do it. What's going on there? There's no rational explanation for him to speak about this like a week later, other than he only recently became aware of it. And if he only recently became aware of such a massive controversy, that tells me there are people around him who are corrupt. And then I have to start asking questions. What else are those people around him doing? And what other information are they keeping him unaware of? And what other information are they perhaps feeding him? Those are questions that need to be further explored, and I will explore them more on this channel. I'm going to go over this other video here with Francis Milone at a later time in more detail, so stick around for that. Go and check out my video that I did yesterday on Cardinal Mueller, because this is tying into that situation. You need to see it, the accusations made against Cardinal Mueller. we're starting to just scratch the surface. I suspect the corruption in the Vatican is more widespread than just these allegations that we explored yesterday. And I suspect there's some pretty high up cardinals who are sabotaging the Pope and doing some pretty bad stuff. We're going to be exploring that more on this channel. All right, everybody, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and let me know your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you think that maybe they're sabotaging the Pope? Maybe that's why only now he's saying something. And do you think that his statement was helpful? Do you think it was productive? Do you think he sufficiently condemned what took place at the Paris Olympics? Do you feel like this was a day late, dollar short kind of stuff? Or do you feel like, no, this was sufficient? I want to hear from you. Put your comments there in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe. And also, please consider supporting what I do here at Reason and Theology at my Patreon account, patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll get access to extra content, and you'll enable me to continue to do what I'm doing here with this channel. So please consider supporting me there. Okay, we'll see you later. God bless.